I've been a bus driver for over 10 years, and I've seen all kinds of things: drunk stumbling on board, kids sneaking on without paying, and the usual rush hour chaos. But nothing prepared me for what started happening a few weeks ago. My shift usually runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the dead hours, as I like to call them. Most of my passengers during that time are night shift workers or partygoers too drunk to drive home. It started small, almost too small to notice. Just a few strange things here and there that I wrote off as exhaustion. One night, I picked up this guy. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, wearing a jacket despite it being warm outside. But what struck me was how still he was. I've seen people sleep on the bus, but this guy didn't move, not even a little twitch. I couldn't tell if he was breathing. At one point, I checked the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of his eyes. He wasn't blinking. I thought maybe he was just tired, or in some sort of trance. I didn't think much of it, dropped him off at his stop, and that was that. But the next night, I saw him again. Same guy, same jacket, sitting in the same seat. Again, no movement, no blinking. I thought it was weird, sure, but maybe he was just a creature of habit. People like routines, right? I figured he lived near the end of my route, so he probably took the bus home every night. But something about him unsettled me. I caught myself looking back at him more than once, just to see if he'd do something, anything. He didn't. Then came the third night. He got on, but this time, something felt off. It wasn't just him. There were others, new faces I didn't recognize, which wasn't unusual for my route. But they all had that same dead stare. They didn't speak, didn't move. They just sat there, staring straight ahead. The air on the bus felt heavy, almost oppressive, and I had this creeping feeling in the back of my mind like I was being watched, closely watched. By the time we reached the last stop, the guy still hadn't moved. Neither had the others. I announced the stop, like I always do, but nobody got up. I even glanced back, just to make sure they heard me. "Hey, last stop. Everyone off." I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. Not even a flinch. I sat there for a minute, not sure what to do. I mean, I can't force people off the bus, right? But they couldn't just sit there all night. I thought maybe they'd all fallen asleep, but when I walked back to check, they were all awake, just sitting there, staring blankly ahead like they were waiting for something. I didn't like it. Not one bit. "Come on, folks. It's the end of the line," I said, a little louder this time. Nothing. That's when it hit me. Something was seriously wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, like a knot twisting tighter and tighter. These people weren't just passengers. They were something else. I didn't know what to do, so I just shut the bus off and waited. I figured they'd eventually snap out of it or something. But after what felt like hours, they still hadn't moved. I finally gave up and started the bus back up, driving to the depot. As soon as we pulled in, I checked the seats. They were empty. Every single one of them was gone. No sign they'd ever been there. No footprints, no bags, nothing. I started doubting myself, thinking maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe I was just too tired, working these long shifts, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the next night, it happened again. Same guy, same jacket. This time, there were even more of them. I didn't recognize any of the new faces, but they all had the same vacant expression. It was like someone had hit pause on their lives, and they were just waiting to start moving again. By now, I was getting freaked out. I didn't say anything to anyone. I mean, what was I supposed to say? "Hey, my passengers aren't getting off the bus, and they disappear when I get to the depot?" Yeah, sure, that'd go over real well. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, I tried to get off the bus myself, just to see what would happen. I parked at the last stop, got up from my seat, and walked to the door. As soon as I reached for the handle, a voice came from behind me. It was soft, barely a whisper, but it made my blood run cold. "Don't leave." I froze, my hand hovering above the door handle. Slowly, I turned around. There, sitting in the back row, was the guy in the jacket. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking, his lips barely moving as he repeated the words. "Don't leave." I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that bus as possible, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was glued to the floor. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. Then, without warning, the lights on the bus flickered. The air grew thick, and I could feel the weight of all those eyes on me, watching, waiting. The man in the jacket spoke again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. His voice was low, commanding. "You belong here now." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating and heavy. "You belong here now." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. My grip on the door handle tightened, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. It was like something was holding me back, something invisible but undeniably there, keeping me from leaving the bus. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I was probably just tired, I told myself. Just overworked and exhausted. This was my mind playing tricks on me, right? I had to break free from this feeling, this oppressive dread that seemed to have settled deep in my bones. But when I turned around to face the man, something had changed. He was closer. I hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen him get up from his seat in the back. Yet now, he was sitting in the middle of the bus, closer to me than before. His face was as blank as ever, his eyes still wide and unblinking. But his mouth, the way it was twisted into the faintest hint of a smile, it made my skin crawl. "Sit down," he said in that same low voice. I didn't want to sit down. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get off that bus, to run and never look back. But my legs moved on their own, and before I knew it, I was back in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead like one of those empty-eyed passengers. The bus was silent except for the low hum of the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw it, there were more of them. The passengers had multiplied. The man in the jacket was now surrounded by others, men, women, even a child, all sitting perfectly still, all staring at me. None of them blinked. I tried to speak, to ask them what they wanted, but my throat felt like it was filled with sand. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my heart racing. I was trapped. The minutes ticked by, and the silence grew heavier. I could feel their eyes on me, burning holes into the back of my skull. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the bus lurched forward, heading for the depot. I had to get out of there. I had to end this nightmare. As we drove through the empty streets, the atmosphere inside the bus grew darker, colder. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me, even though it was the middle of summer. The streetlights outside flickered as we passed, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the seats. I stole a glance in the rearview mirror, hoping, praying, that they were gone. But they weren't. The passengers were still there, still staring, still waiting. And that's when I noticed something that made my heart stop. One of them looked familiar. It wasn't just the man in the jacket anymore. One of the women sitting near the front, I knew her. Or at least, I thought I did. She had the same dark hair, the same pale skin, the same vacant eyes. But there was no way it could be her. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. No, it couldn't be. It was just a coincidence. But the more I stared at her, the more I realized that she wasn't a stranger. She was someone I had picked up before. Weeks ago. She'd gotten on the bus, sat quietly in the back, and then gotten off at her stop like any other passenger. I hadn't seen her since. But here she was, sitting among the others, staring at me with that same lifeless expression. And she wasn't the only one. One by one, I started recognizing the faces around me. They were all people I had picked up before, people who had taken my bus late at night and never gotten off. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. There was no way. I had to be imagining it. These were just random passengers, right? It was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. They were all here. All of them. Every person I had ever picked up on my late-night route who had seemed strange or out of place, they were all here now, sitting on my bus, staring at me with those dead, unblinking eyes. And none of them had ever gotten off. "Where are you taking us?" the man in the jacket asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I opened my mouth to answer, but I had no idea what to say. Where was I taking them? I didn't even know anymore. The streets outside had become a blur, unfamiliar and distorted. I couldn't recognize the landmarks, the buildings. It was like the city itself had changed, twisting into something dark and alien. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The man smiled, a slow, sinister curve of his lips. "You'll know soon enough." I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't want to know. I didn't want any part of this. But I couldn't stop driving. It was like the bus had a mind of its own, pulling me deeper and deeper into the unknown. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, disappearing into the darkness. Time lost all meaning. Hours could have passed, or maybe it was just minutes. All I knew was that the further I drove, the more I felt like I was slipping away, like I was losing myself to whatever was happening. Eventually, the bus came to a stop. I didn't recognize the place. It wasn't the depot, wasn't any stop I'd ever seen before. It was an empty lot, surrounded by towering trees that loomed like shadowy giants. The air was thick with fog, swirling around the bus in dense, suffocating waves. The passengers didn't move. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see what was behind me. But I couldn't help it. Slowly, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The seats were empty. Every single passenger was gone. No sign of them, no trace. Just like before, they had vanished without a sound, without a trace. But this time, it felt different. This time, I knew they weren't really gone. They were still here. I could feel them, their presence lingering in the air, watching me, waiting for something. I didn't know what they wanted, didn't know why they were haunting me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. The bus door creaked open on its own, a slow, groaning sound that sent shivers down my spine. I stared at the door, my mind screaming at me not to go out there, not to leave the safety of the bus. But I couldn't stay here either. I had to get out. I had to end this. Gathering what little courage I had left, I stood up and stepped off the bus. The air outside was cold, biting, and the fog clung to me like icy fingers. I looked around, but there was nothing, just the empty lot, the towering trees, and the suffocating fog. And then, I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling my name. "John." I froze. No one knew my name. Not the passengers, not anyone. But that voice, it was unmistakable. It was the man in the jacket. "John, come back." I turned slowly, my heart racing, and there he was, standing at the edge of the fog, his figure barely visible through the mist. He was smiling, that same eerie, unsettling smile that sent chills down my spine. "You belong here," he said, his voice soft but clear. "You've always belonged here." I shook my head, backing away. No, I don't. I don't know what you want, but I don't belong here." He took a step forward, his smile widening. "Oh, but you do. You've been driving this bus for so long, haven't you? Picking up passengers, taking them where they need to go. But now, it's time for you to stay." I didn't understand what he meant, didn't want to understand. I turned and ran, the fog swallowing me whole as I sprinted through the empty lot. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away from that man, from that bus, from whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape. The fog thickened, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And then, just when I thought I was free, I stumbled into something hard. The bus. It was right there in front of me, as if I had never left. The door was open, the engine idling softly, waiting for me. "Come on, John," the man's voice called from the fog. "It's time to go." I shook my head, backing away from the bus. But as I did, I felt something cold brush against my shoulder. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, just the thick, swirling fog. But then I heard it again, my name, whispered from all around me. "John." I was trapped. No matter where I went, the bus was always there, waiting. And the passengers, they were waiting too. I could feel them, their eyes on me, watching, judging. I stumbled back toward the bus, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no escape. I knew that now. I was stuck in this nightmare, forever driving the same route, forever picking up the same passengers who never got off. The bus door creaked open again, inviting me inside. And I stepped in. As soon as I stepped back onto the bus, the door slammed shut behind me with a sharp, echoing thud. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, trying the handle, yanking on it with everything I had. Locked. It didn't budge. I was trapped inside. The air inside the bus was thick, oppressive. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the very space around me was pressing down, trying to crush me. I walked slowly down the aisle, glancing at the empty seats, my legs trembling beneath me. The fog outside swirled like ghostly tendrils against the windows, creating shifting shapes in the mist, but I couldn't see anything beyond it. But even though the seats were empty, I could feel them. The passengers were still here. Their presence was everywhere, clinging to the air, seeping into every corner of the bus. I felt their eyes on me, felt the weight of their stares, though no one sat in the seats. A low, barely perceptible hum filled the bus, like the faint sound of static on an old television set. It was subtle at first, a soft buzzing at the back of my skull, but it grew louder the longer I stood there. "Hello?" My voice sounded weak, almost foreign. "Is anyone there?" No answer. I stepped forward, my footfalls echoing unnaturally in the narrow aisle. It was as if the sound was swallowed up by the space around me, absorbed by something that wasn't supposed to be there. The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows that twisted and stretched across the seats. For a split second, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, something shifting, something dark and humanoid. I stopped dead in my tracks, turning slowly. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs as I scanned the rows of seats. But nothing. The bus was still empty. I was alone, or at least, I was supposed to be. I forced myself to keep moving, but with every step I took, the air grew heavier, the hum louder. It was coming from the back of the bus. I had to see. I had to know if they were really gone. When I finally reached the last row, I stopped. The hum was deafening now, a low, constant drone that seemed to vibrate in my bones. My hand shook as I reached out toward the back seat, half expecting to feel something there, something cold, something solid. But there was nothing. Just an empty seat. I exhaled sharply, my breath shaky. Maybe I really was losing it. Maybe this was all some twisted hallucination, the result of too many sleepless nights and endless hours driving the same route. I was losing touch with reality, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I turned to head back to the front of the bus, I saw him. The man in the jacket. He was sitting in the same seat he had always sat in, right near the middle of the bus. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, just like before. And this time, he wasn't alone. The others were there too. Every seat that had been empty a moment ago was now filled with those same passengers, the ones who had disappeared, the ones who had never left. Their faces were pale, expressionless, their eyes dark and hollow. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. How did you? The man in the jacket just smiled, that same cold, unsettling smile that sent chills down my spine. You never left, John, he said, his voice low and calm. We've always been here. We've been waiting for you. Waiting for me? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Why? What do you want? He tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. You know why. You've always known. I shook my head. No. I don't. I don't know what's going on, but I don't belong here. I don't belong with you. The smile faded from his face, replaced by a look of pity, almost sadness. You've been driving this route for a long time, John. You've seen things, felt things. You know the passengers who ride your bus. You know they're not like the others. You've always known. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words, but nothing added up. What was he talking about? The passengers were just people. They were just regular people going home from work, going about their lives, weren't they? The man in the jacket leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This is your route, John. This is your bus. And now, you're part of it. Just like the rest of us. My heart pounded in my chest as his words sunk in, each one landing like a blow to my gut. What do you mean? I whispered. What do you mean, part of it? The man stood up slowly, rising to his feet with a smooth, almost unnatural grace. The other passengers remained seated, their eyes still locked on me, their faces devoid of any emotion. He took a step closer, and I backed away, my hands shaking. You've always been part of this, John, he said softly. You just didn't realize it. But now it's time for you to understand. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the bus had changed. The seats were no longer empty. They were filled, packed with people. But they weren't alive. Their skin was pale and cold, their eyes clouded over with death. Some of them looked like they had been there for years, their bodies decayed and rotting, while others looked fresher, like they had just died hours ago. I stumbled backward, my stomach turning. The stench of death was overwhelming, suffocating. The man in the jacket stood in front of me, his eyes dark and empty. You've been driving the dead, John, he said, his voice low and steady. This is the final stop. I shook my head, my mind reeling. No, that's impossible. This can't be real. He stepped closer, and I could feel the cold radiating off him. It's as real as it gets. You've been ferrying souls, John. And now, it's your turn. My turn? My voice cracked. What do you mean? I'm not dead. His smile returned, that same cold, sinister smile. Aren't you? The bus shuddered, and I felt a deep rumble beneath my feet, as if the very ground was shifting. The windows rattled, the air grew colder, and the fog outside thickened, pressing against the glass like a living thing. And then, I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder by the second. It was the sound of breathing. Not just one person's breath, but many, dozens, maybe hundreds. All around me, coming from every direction. I spun around, my heart racing, but the bus was still. The passengers sat silently in their seats, their eyes lifeless, their bodies motionless. Except for one. At the very back of the bus, a figure moved. Slowly, deliberately. It was a woman, her hair matted and tangled, her skin gray and decayed. She stood up from her seat, her eyes locked on mine. And then another passenger stood up. And another. One by one, they all began to rise, their lifeless bodies swaying as they moved toward me. I backed up, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My back hit the front of the bus, and I had nowhere else to go. The man in the jacket smiled. "It's time, John. It's time to join us."